So our next panel will have two panelists. I'd like to invite Tom Ingersoll and Sunil Nagaraj to join me on the podium up here in the seats. If you would come on up. Tom Ingersoll is an aerospace veteran and an entrepreneur with more than 25 years of experience in the space and communications industry. Most recently, he was the CEO of Skybox Imaging, leading from its early development through the launch of 2 high-resolution imaging satellites and then its purchase by Google. Sunil Nagaraj is the vice president in the Menlo Park, California office for Bessemer Venture Partners, early investors in Skybox, focusing on investments in space, development tools, and security companies. He also serves, this is great, on the board of the San Francisco Amateur Astronomers. The session is entitled Commercial Space, The View from an Entrepreneur and a Venture Capitalist. Please welcome Tom and Sunil. Gentlemen, you have 10 minutes each, and then we'll have questions from the audience.
Okay.
Shall I go first?
You're welcome to.
Sure.
I'll go first.
Okay, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, we just decided in real time who would go first.
Oh, yeah, why not?
Shall I wander up there?
I don't know. Good question.
Place to put my notes here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pat, for inviting us to speak and kind of provide you a perspective of someone who has been through the commercial space startup cycle a couple of times. I've actually been through it 3 times, twice successfully, 1 not quite so successfully, so I can look at it from a number of different perspectives. And Pat asked me to share just some thoughts on what it takes to be an effective leader of a venture-backed space venture, as well as what it means and some things that happen when you get acquired by a more mainstream company. I think the most important thing, and which is pretty easy to do in a satellite venture or space venture, is to have a great vision. You have to know where the company's going. You have to be committed to that vision. I think George did a wonderful job of explaining that you're going to have some ups and downs, but you got to stay with it and stay focused and keep your eye on the ball. I think one of the best pieces of advice I got from one of our early investors and a very, very successful CEO, he said, Tom, he said, if you don't do what the board says, you might get fired. However, if you do what the board says, you absolutely will be fired. And I think that's really ties to the fact that you have to have a vision. You're going to have board of directors. You're going to have wonderful VCs like Sunil that have a great opinion about what you should go do. But you really need, as a CEO, to have that vision and just move forward and be committed to your cause. So stick to your vision and move forward. I think the next thing that is really important, and George highlighted again in some of his discussions, is a phrase that I used often when I'm working with small companies. I do some consulting with some small growing venture-backed space startups. And vision without execution is hallucination. And it is so true that this is a hard industry. I mean, this is a very, very hard thing to do. You can't mess around. You can't really do this so much in your garage. You've got to have procedures. There's reasons why Boeing does certain things that they do. There's good elements in that, and you need to adopt that and actually embrace it if you want to be successful. But to be able to do this and to rise above the fray, because there's a lot of space companies out there, what I'll call in the fray, you need to focus on execution, and you need a very, very strong plan to execute. When I'm consulting with firms, and I probably work with 4 or 5 different companies, that's one of the first things I look at. How strongly and how much, what is their focus on the ability to actually execute on the vision that they have. So again, vision without execution is hallucination. I think the next thing that's important, especially when you're working at venture-backed companies, as space nerds, we get really excited about the vision, and all the cool things that we can do, and the technical challenges, and we can do this cool thing and that cool thing. But VCs are in it for the money. Now they're not in it solely for the money, but that's their primary motivation. They can go invest in networking. They can invest in resource sharing. There's lots of cool investment themes that are out there. And space is it's building, but it's not a real traditional investment theme. But as an entrepreneur, you've got to realize, hey, I have to return a whole lot more capital than I get. And you need to go in there with that mindset. And if you are just in it for the passion, you're going to get at odds with your investors because they're in it for the money. Now they'll share your passion, but you need to keep your eye focused on the fact that they're looking for a 10x return. So if you raise $10 million, they're going to want you to return 100, okay? And you can't lose sight of that fact. And everything that you do, you have to execute, you have to keep your vision, but if you don't have some understanding of the need to return that capital and a plan to do so, it can get tough. And that kind of comes with a couple of potential downsides or potential upsides. One is if you get the right financial investors, they're going to help you succeed because they can leverage a lot of their other contacts in the industry. They can bring smarts to bear on problems that are challenging. As George said again, I'll reference this comment again, you have a challenge, they'll help you flywheel through that. It takes very committed people to continue to invest and to grow a team, even in spite of failure and challenge, because we were all going to have it. So you want to make sure you get the right partner. However, when you do that, there is potential for loss of control. And you'll see a lot of, at Skybox, I was CEO 2.0. I wasn't the founding CEO. So as you kind of grow and develop in these smaller companies, you need to keep on the mindset and understanding that, look, our investors are looking for greatest chance of success. That may or may not be me. And if it's not me, then I'll be part of a team that will help maximize success. Because their job is, and their focus is, returning capital to investors. And they don't really care about your personal career growth, right? Or even your vision in some way. So there's that loss of control that comes with being venture-backed, but there's also the fact that there's a leveraging and a multiplying on your ability to succeed because they bring more resources to bear and help you when things are tough. But I think the summary on that is leading with a vision that's more than just cool science. It's leading with a vision that is about the science, but it's also about the execution, how I'm actually going to pull this off, and important part of that is how am I going to return more capital to my investors than I took, okay? And I think that's probably the biggest challenge that we have as an industry, that we've been really, really good at spending money, but haven't been quite so good at returning the capital. There's that old adage, if you want to be a millionaire in space, you start out as a billionaire, and we need to flip that around, right? The best way to become a billionaire is to start out a millionaire and invest in space. Once we're able to do that on a repeat basis, then we're really going to have a lot of momentum going for us. The second thing that Pat had asked me to address a little bit is kind of what happens when you get acquired. And that's actually a potentially good thing. Back to you've got to return more capital than you took. In Skybox, we raised about $100 million, and we returned about 500. So that was a pretty good return to our investors. Other companies that I've founded kind of did something not quite to that level, but also returned more capital than we brought. And what does that mean? So interesting. As I've thought about that, and I've been through the experience now a couple of times. Both of them were different, but my reaction was very different in each case. First company, when we were acquired, I thought, let's be kind of fun. Let's become part of this growing organization and see how it works. And I stayed for about 2 years, and it was about 2 years too long. Because for me, I realized that I'm kind of a builder, and I like to get in and help build an idea, and I like to have that idea come to fruition. But once it's kind of there, I'm not that much of a crank turner, and I'm definitely not kind of a corporate, what I'll call entrepreneur, who likes to sort of rise up that corporate ladder and sort of fight within the company bureaucracy to sort of rise and shine. I just don't like to do that. It's just distracting for me. So I really like to stay focused on a goal, smaller companies, and when Skybox was acquired by Google, my first comment was, how quickly can I get out of here? So I stayed several months, but and Skybox is in great hands at Google. But for me, it wasn't the right fit. However, for a lot of space entrepreneurs, staying with that larger company and becoming part of it is a wonderful career opportunity for grow and to see and have other experiences to potentially magnify their vision in a lot of different ways. So you really want to think about what does the company mean to you? What kind of experiences do you want to have? And I think the other one is that in both of the acquisitions that I was involved in, the acquisition process itself is quite interesting. Because there's some very, very competing tensions. One of which is they want you to know how wonderful you are because they want the whole team to join the company, and they want the acquisition to be smooth, and they want you to continue to grow the product, and they want you to do all these wonderful things to show the management team that they were brilliant in making this acquisition, right? So there's all those positive yada, yada, yada. Well, on the other side is they want to tell you how stupid you are and what failures you are because they want to drop the price, right? And they want to negotiate better terms. So you have this sort of competing element, and I I think all engineers have to do is work with M&A lawyers for some amount of time, and your hatred for lawyers sort of grows and grows and grows. But in both experiences, you have kind of this management team within the acquirer that is trying to be friendly, yet they've got this really nasty legal team that's beating you up on every turn. And so it's just a mind game. And so when you have the opportunity to get involved with that, just realize that that's what it is, and sort of play it right back at them. My second time around, I had a lot more fun with it than I did the first time because I kind of knew what was going on. So I think that in summary on those 2 points, you need to think of an exit. When you take money from a venture capitalist, you need to think of how am I going to give that money back. So you can go public, you can sell your company, you can sell their stock and get new investors in, kind of recapitalize. There's a number of ways to do it, but make sure you think about it. And then secondly, you personally, what role do you want to play as that happens? Do you want to stick with it forever? Is this your baby, you never want to let it go, or do you want to kind of go on to something new? So I hope that's helpful, and look forward to questions, and turn over to Sunil.
Thanks, Tom. Great, really glad to be here. On the flight over, I was reading the news, and I'm curious if everyone's heard about the news about Pluto, blue skies on Pluto. Really exciting. I thought that was such a neat turn of events to see that happening. Completely unexpected, so go figure. So I'll talk to you today about investing in space. In Silicon Valley, I run this group of young VCs, about 300 people, and I tell them I'm investing in space. I've been actively sort of chiming the bell for space for about a year and a half. Every single person I talk to says, that's crazy. It's too expensive, and it takes too long. Too expensive, takes too long. Now that if you say it enough, you start to believe it, and I think that's completely wrong. Before we get into that, let me tell you a little bit more about Bessemer Venture Partners. So I'm at a VC firm called Bessemer. I've been at Bessemer for about 5 years, and we have a fund that mostly invests in technology. We were the first investors in Skype, the first investors in Pinterest, some of the first investors in LinkedIn. So 90% of our efforts, our thinking is all modeled around tech. That's going to become relevant in a second. We have about 60 investors, and I'm in the Menlo Park office. And all the investments that we do, because we do tech, have this cash flow characteristic where for 6 months or a year, you need a good chunk of cash in order to go build a product, and then very quickly you can you dip into the cash trough, and then you quickly shoot out. That's very different than taking a small amount of money and then slowly growing. Those aren't the investments that we're looking to do. We're looking to do, let's say, something like Google, where you need 5 or 10 engineers to work quietly for a year in a closet, finish building the product, and then when you unleash it, the marginal cost to serve every additional customer is effectively zero. If Google has 1 billion or 1,000,001 users, it's the same cost to them. And so as a result, they can grow really quickly. So that's the mindset that my whole partnership comes to every investment with. When we talk on Mondays, all 60 of us are in a virtual room. We have video conferencing. And we look at every investment with this lens of, is it going to have the right cash flow characteristics? Is it going to be interesting? And so my colleague David Cowan, who led our investment in Skybox and was on Tom's board, myself, Scott Smith, who's COO of Iridium and is an operating partner at Bessemer, and then Ray Johnson, who was CTO of Lockheed. We make up the space tech team at Bessemer, and I'll tell you what we're seeing happening in space. This is going to be old hat to many of you, but I'll tell you how we think about it, and hopefully that'll inform more entrepreneurs in the audience to accelerate their thinking. So the main things that we see happening are fairly obvious. The cost reductions, I think George mentioned this earlier, satellites that were 500 million can now be 500,000, literally 1,000th the cost. That's driven largely by the consumer electronics industry and having some of those less hardened parts come into the aerospace realm. The idea of standardization, to think about 1980, when every person built their own motherboard, built their own chassis, it seems like 5-10 years ago was a pretty similar situation in space. And with the advent of the CubeSat standard and the advent of components and the companies like Clyde Space and Pumpkin, you're seeing just a dramatic acceleration when everyone can depend on everyone else's, and there's common interfaces, and they're readily accessible to tinkerers. That's a really big deal around standardization. So as a result, between just those two elements, between cost reductions and standardization around a small chassis, a small bus, we've seen an explosion, as you all have, around small sat constellations. Now, to point out something that I mentioned earlier, the cash flow curve, these small sat constellations fit that perfectly. You need some time and money to do R&D, but once the constellation is up, and if you can do it in a a scrappy way. Spire, for example, this past a week ago, launched 4 of their first production satellites, and we'll start to turn on revenue immediately. We don't have to wait for all 100 to go into orbit, but the key to that is that we can now avoid a 5-year design, build, and testing process. We have monthly build, design, and testing, and every additional batch of satellites, which are launching every 1 or 2 months, are a little bit better than the ones before. That reminds us so much of the tech industry, and that's why my partnership is really excited about investing in space, and that's why I'm excited about investing in space. These parallels to tech go so far that I'm now seeing tech entrepreneurs who have very little experience in space entering the space industry. That's a really big deal. Another really big deal is people, the space entrepreneurs I meet, say, it doesn't matter if it blows up. It doesn't matter if it works. That phrase would have never been said, I believe, in the space industry 5 years ago. Things were too expensive, and everything had to work perfectly. You need multiple levels of redundancy. And so with these small sat constellations with standardized parts, you're seeing tech entrepreneurs come in and move really quickly. That agility is a hallmark of Silicon Valley right now with tech startups. I ran my own tech startup for 2.5 years, and we would think of a feature over lunch, my team of 5 people. We'd build it the afternoon. We'd put sensors and metrics in as well, and by the next morning, we'd know from our users whether it was a good feature or not. So less than a 24-hour iteration cycle is critical to being able to hone in on exactly what your customers want, find product market fit as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, when space is expensive and difficult and a long lead time, you just don't get that iteration cycle quickly enough. Now we're seeing startups that are agile enough, and they talk about satellites the same way that Google talks about servers. It doesn't matter if it breaks. The companies like Netflix actually have programs that go break servers on purpose. There's a program called Chaos Monkey at Netflix that does that. But Planet Labs and Spire talk about satellites as versions. We're launching version 6.2 this week. Next week we'll launch version 6.3. So these parallels between tech are important and are driving a lot of the investment in the space. So as I think about what I tell my fellow VCs, I'm going to continue sort of leading the charge that this is an interesting area where, take for a company example, a company like Skybox, we put in something like $20 million and held the investment for 4 years. That looks very much like a normal tech investment for us. This is not billions of dollars in 10 years and cross your fingers. This is predictably, and with strong leadership of folks like Tom, predictable milestones, predictable test points along the way, and a reasonable amount of capital in a reasonable time frame. VC firms in general are set up as 10-year partnerships, and so we need to, our typical hold is 4 to 7 years, and we'd like to, as a $1.6 billion fund that we're investing out of, we'd like to invest $20 or $30 million. And there are funds that are smaller than us, and we want this whole ecosystem to come together. I think for commercial space to succeed, we need hardworking executives, hardworking entrepreneurs like the folks in this room. We need passion. We also need access to capital. And I think that the floodgates will open when more of the investment community views space the way that I do, as a tight analog to the tech industry's rise. So as I look at what's ahead and what we're investing in, I think of 3 areas. Before I go into those, let me tell you what we've invested in so far. So we've invested in Skybox and exited that investment. In December, we invested in Rocket Lab. This is a 150 kilogram launcher to LEO based out of New Zealand. CEO Peter Platzer has been doing this for almost 10 years as a rocket scientist and an entrepreneur. And we'll be launching our first test flight orbital in a few months. In June, we invested in Spire, and as I mentioned, Spire had their first 4 production satellites launched. So these are 3U CubeSats that listen to the sounds of Earth. So rather than Earth's Earth observation with visible spectrum or multispectral, this is, we listen to AIS signals, which are the signals emitted from boats and cargo vessels. And we also, at the moment, listen to GPS-RO, which is when GPS signals kind of bend in the Earth's atmosphere, and we use that to build what will soon be the best database for weather prediction that's ever existed. We'll continue to add more and more RF sensors on our 3U CubeSat platform in the agile method. We have sales talking to customers, and as we see enough demand, we'll add another set of functionality, another element to our payload on the Spire satellites. So those are our 3 investments so far: small sat constellation, rocket launcher, and another small sat constellation. We think there's still a lot more room to run with small sat constellations. I mean, the general formula is take a large single-use satellite that's in space. Landsat would be an example of a government satellite, and see what you can do if you could launch a bunch of smaller ones. Obeying the laws of physics with diffraction limits and all that, it means there's certain apertures that you need for things like that. But could you take that, break it into 25 satellites with a higher revisit and more points of redundancy, but in a distributed satellite format? And can you do that in a cost-effective trough in the cash flow curve? And is there a large enough market to justify the investment? So small-sat constellations are number one. Number two are enabling technologies. This includes, sometimes people call this picks and shovels. When we're talking about tech, just enabling elements. They're not playing the main game, you're helping the main game be played. And that includes rocket launch, that includes on-orbit propulsion, ground stations. So we're watching all these areas very closely to see if there are interesting opportunities. The third area is one that my partnership is even more comfortable with because everyone can understand it, and it connects directly between space and tech. And this is on Earth data analysis. So with these large pipelines of imagery and other measurements coming down from now these small sat constellations, how do we take those and make them more applicable to the rest of the world? How do you help business decision makers make decisions off of this data as opposed to looking at pictures and having a Google Maps-like license where you get pennies for the imagery? How can you turn that into business value and then monetize accordingly? So those are three areas, and I'll leave everyone with this final closing thought. I think the areas 4, 5, 6, 7 have yet to be determined. I hope that where we're at right now with commercial space is where the internet was in 92, 91, where TCP/IP is sort of settled in. We know that computers can talk to each other, just like we know that satellites can take pictures, but we don't yet know what else to do on top of that. We're still figuring that out. And so things like SSL certs for e-commerce to happen, things like high bandwidth for media to happen, and communication and games and Netflix, and all these things have yet to be developed. And I believe truly that this space is going to explode in a good way. And all we have to do is look to the tech industry to find those analogies. For that to happen, we need to keep continuing the level of innovation and also focus on new wallets. If we can talk to more customers outside of the space industry and determine new applications for space, fundamentally new applications, a hint of one that I've been hearing a little bit more about are microgravity. I think Owana is here from NASA, but microgravity production of different materials. I have no idea if that's going to pan out or not, but it's a completely new area. It's not remote sensing, it's not comms, it's not nav. It's a new bucket with a new set of buyers, and that's really helpful for our area. So thank you much, and we'll answer questions now.